In his latest post on the Truth Social platform, US President Donald Trump issued a new ultimatum aimed directly at Iran. If Iran does not fully open and stop threatening at the Strait of Hormuz within 48 hours from this moment, the US will attack and destroy their power plants, starting with the largest one. The focus of this declaration remains centered on the Strait of Hormuz, a maritime route regarded as the global energy valve, where every fluctuation can immediately trigger a chain of economic and geopolitical consequences. From the perspective of observers, Trump setting a specific time limit signifies that he is in a great hurry and lacks the patience to transition from a state of applying pressure to being ready for action, thereby elevating tensions to a dangerous new threshold. Instead of merely stopping at deterrent statements, this message implies that Washington is considering the use of hard power to force Tehran to change its behavior at a vital strategic choke point. Given that the Strait of Hormuz transports a significant portion of the global oil supply, any move to control or disrupt this route is no longer a bilateral issue between the US and Iran, but has become an energy security problem for the entire world. Therefore, the 48-hour ultimatum is not just a threat, it is essentially a sign that a new spiral of escalation is beginning to form, with a level of risk far exceeding anything seen before. The 48-hour ultimatum may grab headlines, but what is truly concerning lies in the target Trump is aiming at: Iran's power grid. This is no longer a purely military strike, but a distinct shift toward a different form of conflict, where civilian infrastructure, especially energy, becomes a strategic Achilles heel. In the structure of any modern nation, electricity not only serves daily life, but also sustains all industrial, military, medical, and administrative activities. When power plants are targeted, what is threatened is not just defensive capability, but the very functioning of the entire nation. Consequently, the message from Washington is understood as an upgrade in operational thinking, from weakening armed forces to paralyzing the opponent's foundation of existence. This is a form of warfare that does not require territorial control, but can still create pressure to force the opponent to concede. When energy becomes the target, the boundary between military warfare and economic warfare is almost blurred. This approach clearly reflects the power logic pursued by Trump. His statements show a consistent view that once dominance is achieved, there is no reason to stop or compromise. Instead of viewing negotiation as a process of seeking a balance point, this approach turns negotiation into an imposition tool, where the opponent has only two choices: accept or suffer greater losses. Among analysts, this is often called a coercion strategy, using military power and the threat of escalation to force the opponent to change behavior without necessarily entering a full-scale war. However, what makes the picture more complex lies in the very contradictions within the messages from the US side. On one hand, the administration continuously signals that it could reduce its military presence in the Middle East, creating a sense that the conflict is nearing an end. On the other hand, proposals to increase the defense budget, strengthen military capabilities, and expand force deployment suggest the opposite: preparation for a more prolonged phase of confrontation. The coexistence of these two contradictory messages is not accidental. It reflects a fairly distinct two-tier strategy. At the domestic level, emphasizing victory and the possibility of withdrawal aims to reassure the American public, who are increasingly sensitive to the cost and duration of overseas conflicts. In the context of internal politics, maintaining the image of a war that is ending is just as important as the developments on the battlefield itself. Conversely, at the international level, continuing to increase military presence and maintain pressure sends a completely different signal. The US is not ready to retreat, and any power vacuum will be strictly controlled. This helps Washington maintain the initiative while preventing adversaries or proxy forces from taking advantage of opportunities to expand their influence. In other words, this two-tier strategy allows the US to cool down in the eyes of the public while turning up the heat on the ground. Meanwhile, the reaction from Tehran shows a symmetrical but more flexible approach. Instead of a direct confrontation with equivalent power, which is nearly impossible, Iran chooses a deterrence strategy based on the ability to cause damage. Statements from the Iranian side emphasize that if their energy infrastructure is attacked, the entire energy system and US interests in the region will also become targets. This is a way of shifting the game from who is stronger to who suffers more losses. Notably, Iran has not completely closed the Strait of Hormuz, but has only restricted it selectively. This shows that Tehran is trying to maintain a level of escalatory control, enough to apply pressure but not crossing the threshold that would trigger a full-scale explosion of conflict. In this way, Iran both retains strategic leverage and avoids pushing itself into an uncontrollable confrontation. The core of Iran's strategy lies in a simple but effective reality. They do not need to win in the traditional sense. Just by maintaining a state of instability, causing the opponent to pay the price in economic, political, and security terms, they have achieved their goal. In an environment where energy prices, supply chains, and market sentiment are all extremely sensitive, even a small disruption at Hormuz is enough to create an impact far beyond the actual military scale. It is precisely the opposition between one side pursuing overwhelming power and the other side utilizing asymmetry to cause interference that has made the situation particularly dangerous. When one side believes they can control the game through power, while the other side only needs to break stability to achieve their goal, the risk of miscalculation increases significantly. And in that context, each ultimatum and each deterrent move is no longer an isolated step, but is gradually accumulating into a spiral of escalation with no clear stopping point. From strategic calculations and reciprocal deterrent reactions, a reality is becoming increasingly clear. This conflict is moving beyond a bilateral framework and gradually approaching the threshold of globalization. The epicenter of that process is the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most important energy choke point. It is no coincidence that every military and political move revolves around this area. Approximately 20 to 30% of the global oil supply passes through this narrow but vital maritime route, meaning any disruption, however small, could trigger a chain effect across the entire international economic system. Therefore, when tensions escalate at Hormuz, the story no longer stops at the US or Iran. It immediately draws in the direct and indirect involvement of a host of other actors. Israel, with security interests closely tied to containing Iran, has shown an increasingly clear role in military operations. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia, one of the world's largest energy exporters, cannot stand aside when a strategic transport route is threatened. Alongside nations, the presence of proxy forces makes the picture even more complex. These are unofficial actors who nonetheless have the capability to cause very real impacts, from attacking infrastructure and sabotaging transport routes to creating new hotspots. As more parties participate, the line between a regional conflict and a global crisis becomes thinner than ever. This shift reflects a new logic of conflict. Instead of destroying enemy forces on the battlefield, parties seek to paralyze the operational capability of the entire nation. When power is cut, production chains stall. When energy sources are disrupted, every sector from transportation and healthcare to security is affected. This is a form of warfare that does not require territorial occupation but can still cause deep and long-lasting damage. Among strategic researchers, this trend is increasingly referred to as infrastructure warfare, where the target is no longer the military but the system that feeds and sustains the nation. What is worrying is that this type of conflict is much harder to control than traditional warfare. An attack on energy infrastructure not only causes direct damage, but can also trigger a chain reaction from many sides, increasing the risk of unintended escalation. Notably, neither side shows signs of being truly ready to back down. The US continues to maintain pressure and strengthen its presence, while Iran remains steadfast in its asymmetric deterrence strategy. Other involved parties, from Israel to Saudi Arabia, are also being drawn deeper into this spiral. As interests overlap and the level of involvement increases, the possibility of finding a common stopping point becomes more difficult than ever. All these factors are pushing the world closer to a new threshold of instability, where conflict is no longer limited within geographic borders but spreads through global economic and energy networks. And in that context, A reality is gradually becoming clear. When energy is not just a resource, but also a tool for pressure, then any nation can become an affected subject. When energy becomes a weapon, every nation becomes a target.